Community members are calling for an investigation into a local nonprofit supporting immigrant workers after it announced plans to close. The Arriba Las Vegas Workers Center offers work training and labor rights support to immigrant workers. The organization says it plans to transition its programs by the end of July of next year. It also says it'll be closing its legal department this month. The organization says it will help its clients change providers at no cost. Former employees and board members joined in a protest today. They say they want better transparency about the organization's future and the impact to those who rely on their services. They also want an investigation into workplace treatment and financial decisions. And ultimately, they hope that the center will stay open.
There's a lot of workers who not receive protection, who they don't have a hope. This place is hope. They are in their workplaces, probably facing retaliation, facing abuse. So who are going to answer the question when they try to walk in on this place about the concern in the workplace?
Arriba Las Vegas Workers Center has issued a statement saying in part, the proposal to sunset the organization was not made lightly and was made after careful considerations of the current funding environment and the long-term financial realities facing the organization. While we do understand not everyone will agree with this decision, we remain committed to completing the organization's work responsibly. The organization also said it would not comment publicly on personnel matters.